Hello everyone, Crystal K here. I know this is a bit different than you're used to. Well, to make a long story short, my PC is down and will be for a long time. So I decided to start uploading stories for AI to read, as I can do it all from my phone. I plan to write my own stories and upload those along with others. The first story is by a good friend of mine, wolfe as she likes to go by. She asked me to so she can listen to her story. With that being said, let's get into it and I hope you all like this. Chapter 1. Gather round children for a story that none know of. The ankle-length silvery white-haired woman stated to the children within the family. The children ranging in various ages sat around her as figures made of snow appeared to show the story she was about to tell. It was the height of the Great War. A war between the gods of legends and old and their enemies, the demons that haunt the nightmares of children, or so it was said that demons were the bad species. On this specific day our story starts with a beautiful goddess with long white hair and molten golden eyes with specks of blue in them. She is the goddess of hope, walking the remains of a battle. The sight of all the bodies on the ground churned her stomach and made her even sadder than she was since the beginning of the war. She never wanted a part of it, so she decided to walk the grounds and care for the injured on either side. This is just horrible. She looked to the sky. Is this what you wanted, Zeus? She called out. When she saw a white and blue speckled-haired kitsune demon head move, seeing someone alive, she went to help the injured kitsune demon. She started to clean the wounds the young dying kitsune had in his stomach and chest. The blood had spilled from his body, covering the ground where he had laid, dyeing the green grass beneath him crimson red along with his hair. Her white feathered blending to lavender wings folded behind her. As she kneeled in the blood-soaked ground to help the injured kitsune. She was so engrossed in caring for the injured kitsune she didn't sense the presence coming up behind her. Then there was the feel of cold steel against her throat. Leaning back to the being, she glanced up at the being and instantly her heart began to beat faster. Kill me if you wish, but let me save this man first. The goddess said sternly, not backing down from the being. The male eyed her and saw her sincerity in her amber eyes and removed the blade from her throat. I will spare you for now, goddess, but if he dies, so do you. The male demon stated as he placed the blade in its sheath at his hip. It was clear this man had a connection to his comrade. The goddess instantly went back to helping the kitsune who was injured. The male demon sat on the side of the kitsune as he watched her bandage up his friend, the bandaging starting to turn crimson from the blood that still flowed from his body. However, it didn't flow as freely now. Once she was done, she twinkled a little of her healing powers to him to kickstart his healing ability. As she did, a pale lavender light shone from her, going into the kitsune's body. She sat back on her heels and looked at the man that sat across from her. He was wearing a black as onyx hooded cloak that she could only catch the smell of the area around them from him, not his own scent. Though when she looked up at him when he had the blade at her throat, she had seen what he looked like. He had dark amber eyes, long claws on his powerful hands, and fangs that all demons have. He had a muscular definement about him that made him very attractive, though she could feel it. There was something about this male demon across from her that made him mysterious and unique to her. Though she could tell there is something special about this demon, something in the look in his eyes showed her he was different than the other demons and especially the celestials. Your friend will be fine, he is already starting to heal. The goddess said to the male demon, her golden amber eyes looking at the demon. I should be going, she said softly as she stood from her kneeled position, crimson red covering her clothes, especially where she had kneeled down. The male demon rose with her when she turned away to keep checking the bodies to find others to help, when he reached a hand out and grasped a hold of her wrist. Wait, you're a goddess, why help a demon? The male spoke. The goddess turned to face him, the look on her face gave him his answer before she spoke. Her golden amber eyes showed the sadness and horror of what the fighting in the war had done to the world and the losses on both sides. I save all those that have been injured on either side. I want nothing to do with this war. The fighting needs to stop, the goddess stated softly, answering the demon's question. The male demon didn't believe her, but he picked the kitsune up, who was still asleep, as he healed. The demon looked down at the kitsune for a brief moment, the kitsune's eyes fluttering as if he were dreaming. You're going to be all right, son. When he looked back, the beautiful goddess was gone, so he carried the kitsune back to base. Hidden from the trees on the sidelines of the battlefield, she stood watching as the male demon carried his friend away from the field. Our paths are not done crossing. Neither of us three. The goddess spoke softly so he wouldn't hear her. Placing a hand on the trunk of a nearby tree, she leaned against it. She vanished from the field in a bright light and appeared in another forest far away. It was that time of year when she met with an old friend. He is a Chinese water dragon by the name of Zan. She had saved him at the start of the Great War. Hope, how have you been? A male's voice said as he floated low to the ground in front of where she sat on the green grass that was soft. Hope looked up at hearing the voice. Zan, I have been well. Yourself? She asked. When meeting with this water dragon, she always had a smile and she was more relaxed. Her long hair was up in a high ponytail. Her usual glow was around her. They had grown to be like family over the years that they had their visits. Though they were of a different species. One a goddess, one a Chinese water dragon. Though he never told her, his species was on the verge of extinction. He never wanted their visits to be sad, only good happy visits. I am well, Zan answered back, giving her a smile. He could tell she was bursting with news, and he could not wait to hear it. Zan, I have news for you. It just happened this day, Hope said softly to him as she leaned forward, trying not to raise her voice. Zan was even now more curious as to what this news was. He moved forward so she could whisper it to him. I was on the remains of a battlefield and was helping a kitsune demon who had been injured when a man came up behind me and put a blade to my throat. I guess he assumed I was doing something bad to his fallen comrade. So I looked back at him and said that he could kill me if he wished, but to let me save the kitsune first. He let me continue, but, Zan, as soon as I looked at him, my heart started to beat faster. I haven't stopped thinking about him since, Hope said to him. Zan gave her his own special kind of smile as he heard what she said. It sounded as though his adopted sister had found love finally, even in an immersive war like the one these two species were in. He is a shadow-born, I am sure of it. He has to be, with the way he was able to sneak up on me, and the scent that came from was one of the surrounding area. Of the ground and blood and death, Hope added as she gave a huge smile on her face as she continued to think about the shadow-born that had snuck up behind her. Zan was happy for his adopted sister. She deserved to be happy. What about you, Zan? Any news to share? Hope had asked her longtime friend. Several months later, the goddess was walking the first battlefield that started the Great War. The field of black and white roses she had planted at the start of the Great War had long since died, however more always seemed to grow in their place. The field of roses each planted for the loss of a life she could not save. She folded her wings behind her as she sat in the middle of the field, the sorrow she felt about every life she could not save falling from her eyes in watery tears. Strange seeing you here, she heard a seemingly familiar male's voice say as a body sat next to her. She looked over at the male, seeing the demon who had held a blade to her throat several months before. Your friend is doing well, I trust? She asked, her voice only an octave above a whisper. The male demon eyed her as he could really make out her features now that he wasn't worried over his friend as much. Her hair was to her thighs the color of silvery white, her soft features that made her the most beautiful goddess he had laid eyes on. she had a glow about her that he reveled in. He could see the tears in her eyes and falling down her cheeks. Raising a clawed hand, he wiped away the tears from her cheeks. "Why do you cry, goddess?" he asked. Her golden amber eyes looked at him, a light within them that he could picture shining on every shadow in his life. "Hope." She spoke the simple word, and he had a look of confusion on his face as he looked into her eyes, while she looked into his darker amber eyes. In his eyes she could see the toll the war was having on him. He wanted the war to end just as much as she did. He was tired of the pain, the death, and the bloodshed. "My name is Hope," she added as she saw his confused look. He nodded his head at her words and looked around to ensure they were alone. "Aikido," the male said. At hearing his name she put two and two together. "It is finally nice to officially meet you, Godkiller Aikido cursed," Hope said softly. She then decided to ask about his friend, whom she figured was the legendary Godkiller Leo Ninetails, Aikido's second-in-command and best friend. "I trust your second-in-command made a full recovery by now," Hope added. Her golden amber eyes looking into his darker amber eyes, pretty sure that if he hadn't she would have been killed by now. "He did, thank you for healing him. He has been asking about the woman who saved his life," Aikido answered. Hope nodded her head at his answer. She was unaware that Leo had been awake enough to see her help him. She looked out at the field and open space around them. "These roses were not here when the first battle started," Aikido said as he followed her gaze out to the field. Hope shook her head as her knees were brought up to her chest with her head laying on them. "I planted them for all that lost their lives. I do so with all the battlefields, with all the ones I can't save," Hope answered Aikido. "I have a dream that might stop the war. However, I seriously doubt I'd be able to find another who might share wanting to end the war," Hope added as she turned her head to look at the first demon she had become friends with. He stared into her golden amber eyes that seemed to say more than she wanted to. Eyes that seemed to swallow him whole and made him get lost as he stared into her eyes. "You truly despise all the fighting and bloodshed?" he asked softly, sounding briefly surprised that a celestial hated the fighting and bloodshed. Hope nodded her head at his question. "Yes, I firmly believe that all the races are equal and the fighting needs to stop. However, I am the only celestial who believes that. Or at least the only one that speaks freely about it, and for that I was cast out of the realm," Hope said, though she cared not that she was cast out. She preferred it that way. She could do more good helping those in battle than up in the realm. As she sat there she couldn't help but feel like the Great War was her fault just because she couldn't stop them from it happening. "I am sorry for the horror that your people have had to endure from mine," Hope spoke softly as she glanced at Aikido. Aikido nodded his head as he also looked at her. The sincerity within her golden amber eyes told him all that he needed to know about how much she hated the war and the death on both sides. "It would be nice for this war to end," Aikido stated softly as he looked at her. Hope knew that Aikido was tired of this war, she could see it in his dark amber eyes. The Great War had lasted quite a while. "What is your idea to end the Great War?" Aikido asked as she looked at him. Hope gave a soft smile at his question. "I believe that if we unite the races that it will end the Great War," Hope spoke as she leaned over to keep her words silent from the gods. Aikido nodded his head at her words. "I see, that could work, but I believe that this war just needs to end," Aikido stated as he leaned in as well. Their eyes met and it was as if they could see each other's fate and future within each other's eyes. "Perhaps we should just talk to our superiors. If there are more of us on both sides the war could end," Hope said softly. Aikido looked at her and smiled sweetly as his amber eyes gazed into that of the beautiful goddess he saw before him. Glancing slightly behind her, he could see her wings were made of feathers. However, instead of white or a silvery white like her hair or like any other celestial, her wings seemed to glow just like she herself. He could make tell they started in a white color at the top, blending into a lavender color at the bottom. Akito looked back at her and smiled. Perhaps that could work. We could always give it a try, Akito stated as he kept his eyes glued on her golden amber eyes. This might be fast, but I see something special about you, Akito, Hope said as she leaned in closer to him. She could feel that herself and Akito would have a strong bond as time went. Taking a chance, she laid her head on his shoulder as they sat in the field. However, it was Akito that wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful to avoid her wings. The field is beautiful with memorial roses, Hope, Akito spoke as he placed his head on top of hers. Hope smiled, though he could not see it, as she breathed in deeply to catch his scent. Her nose was not as good as Demon's when it came to catching a scent. However, she could still scent his natural smell of blood and roses. While she breathed in his scent, he was breathing in her scent, his nose sharper than a celestial nose. To his nose he smelled the scent of water and cherry blossoms in a field, with a hint of what smelled like sunshine coming from her. A scent that he would ensure was engraved into his memory for all time, as she was the first celestial to be helpful and kind to demons, especially a demon such as he. Chapter 2. 3 years later, Akito and Hope have a consistent meeting in the field of the first battle. He continues to lead the demons while he also lets her know where the battles will take place so she can save all that she can. She had told him of the judgmental god that she had been seeing for several centuries, but upon hearing his views of the war and what he thought of demons, she left him. Akito told her of the angel he had fallen in love with a few years before the war started. How the demon king had lied to him about her, that he was now cursed to rise every time he died, and how he forgot his life with every death. If I may ask, how did she die? Hope asked as she sat with him in the field. Akito looked down sadly. The demon king lied to me and told me that she was just using me for my power. I hate the fact that it happened, but because of his lies I killed her, Akito explained to Hope. She nodded her head, knowing that it was a sad and horrible thing to happen to not just the angel, but to Akito as well. Hope shook her head at the thought of what Akito and the angel was put through. I am sorry that happened, Akito, Hope said as she put her head on his shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her, holding her close to him. Over the years they had grown quite close. The only one who knew they were meeting was his best friend and second in command, Leo Ninetails. About a year or two ago they decided to not just help those they can but to also be a couple. They kept it secret except for Leo Ninetails, knowing he covered for Akito when he would go to meet her. When Akito couldn't make it, Leo would go and get to know her. So they kept their relationship a secret until the end of the Great War, when they could truly be together and not have to hide who they are. Is Leo back at base? Hope asked as she leaned more into him. Akito nodded his head as he placed a kiss on the top of her silvery white hair. Yeah, he is covering for me. I had to see you, Hope, Akito spoke as she leaned up, her eyes locking with his. She blinked briefly, her long white lashes sweeping along her cheekbones as her golden amber eyes closed, then gazed at him. Hope, I know the war is still going on, but there is something I want to ask you, Akito stated softly as he turned to face her better. Hope had turned to face him more. Akito, what is it? Hope asked as she gazed at him. Her heart always continued to beat fast around him, or whenever she thought about him. Akito was nervous, but he had fallen in love with this beautiful goddess. He didn't want to spend another day without her. Hope, I love you dearly, will you be my mate? Akito asked her as he placed a beautiful ring on her finger. Hope smiled and had tears in her eyes as she looked like she was about to cry. Yes, Akito, let us not wait till the war is over. Let's have a small ceremony, just you, me and a priest, Hope said as she got on her knees before him. Akito, surprised by this, looked at her in shock at first. Akito stood up and held his hand out for her hand, which she took instantly. Akito lifted to her feet and together they vanished to a priest friend of Hope's. Little did they know that hidden on either side of the field in the trees was a god of the hunt, an employee of the gods, and a demon whose loyalties lied with King Demos, the Demon King. Each one vanished to their lords with this news. Both knew that this union could not be. A Shadowborn uniting with a goddess could never end well. King Demos sent his spy to the Shadowborns to inform them of what their prince was up to. Meanwhile, the god of the hunt reported to his boss, Ares, the god of war. Ares, with a wicked smile on his face, knowing that Hope had cast the final straw against Zeus and the other celestials, went to the king of the gods and told him what the minor god had seen and heard. Zeus let out an angry yell, calling his brothers to him for a meeting on how to approach this problem with Hope and her union with the Shadow-born demon prince. Poseidon and Hades walked into Zeus' throne room. "What is the trouble, Zeus?" Poseidon asked as they took their seats beside him. "Hope is attempting to unite the races," Zeus said angrily to his brothers. Poseidon thought momentarily. Hades, however, did not quite understand the meaning behind the anger. "Zeus, why so angry?" "Hope found love," Hades stated softly to his brother. Zeus looked at Hades like he had grown another head, which isn't too weird considering Hades' three-headed dog Cerberus. Hades thought it was great that Hope had found love even if Zeus didn't. "Hades, the love that she has found is with the Shadow-born prince, Akito," Zeus stated to Hades. Poseidon and Hades looked at each other and shook their heads. Neither one of them cared much for this war that was happening. Granted, they did what they could to support their asshole of a brother. "I know how to stop her from bringing her dream to life. We will send a messenger to the demon race to start a truce. We'll send Ares' top 2 guys over and kill the Demon King and make it look like Akito and his second-in-command did it. Send them into hiding and leave her alone in the world," Zeus said as he looked at his brothers. Hades and Poseidon looked at each other and nodded their heads at their brothers' and king's plan. "That sounds like a plan," Poseidon stated, then looked at Hades again. Hades stood up from his seat and started to walk away. He had an appointment that he had to keep with the 3 fates. King Demos received word from the Shadowborns and concocted a plan to try and stop the goddess and Akito from uniting the races. The Shadowborns sent back the princess to the Demon King to help stop this unity. The history of the Shadowborns was a strange one. Shadowborns are not created out of marital relationships. The king and queen of the Shadowborns take 1 or 2 children from their families that have the shadow powers. Akito was the prince that the king and queen took, however the princess, Ruby, who was also taking from her family. She wore a red hooded cloak that covered face and facial features. The king had offered the princess to Akito to be his wife, and though Akito cared for his sister, marrying her was not what he wanted. Princess Ruby stood before the Demon King listening to his plan. "Princess Ruby, with your shadow power I want you to sneak into the truce meeting, and attack the Celestials. I will have Prince Akito and Leo there with me for protection," King Demos stated to Princess Ruby. Upon Ruby's back was a bow made of ruby, an empty-looking quiver. However, she has an endless supply of arrows. One of her powers is that she crystallized magic that is fired at her, and shoots it back at them. "As you command, my king," Ruby stated as she then slipped back into the shadows until the night of the truce. Akito and Hope finished with their small ceremony as the priest said, "You may kiss the bride." Akito instantly had his lips on Hope's, in a passionate kiss that she returned with fever. The priest stood beside them as he watched the couple with a wondrous smile on his face. When Akito finally pulled back from Hope's lips, he smiled sweetly at his love. Hope smiled at him, and without even looking away from Akito's eyes, she spoke to the priest. "Thank you, as." Hope said softly as she kept her golden amber eyes on the location of where Akito's dark amber eyes would be underneath his black hood. The priest nodded his head. "You are very welcome, Hope," the priest stated softly, then walked away from them to give them some privacy. "Hope we have this night, but then I will have to go back to base. Please join with me," Akito whispered in her ear as he moved and picked her up. He then started to walk away with her as he carried her to a room they had reserved prior to the ceremony. Hope smiled innocently. "Yes, Akito." Hope spoke softly as she started to kiss him passionately as he carried her into the room. Slowly he set her down and they started to remove each other's clothing. Akito started to kiss down Hope's neck. Hope moaned aloud as she ran her smooth fingertips up and down his body as she raised her, made sure her lips were upon his chest. Akito grasped her hands and placed them on the buttons of his cloak. "Take it off, Hope." Akito spoke to her. He would not take her by wearing his hooded cloak. He would let her see the real him. He respected her with all he was. He loved her more than he knew was truly possible. Hope's fingers were easily unbuttoning his cloak. When she was done with the buttons, she raised her hands up to lower his hood. She knew how the Shadowborns were. They always kept their hoods up unless they truly respected the person. Her fingertips touched the cloth of his hood as she hesitated, wanting to ensure he was all right with this. Akito nodded his head, giving her permission to lower his hood. With tentative and gentle hands, Hope lowered his hood. Her golden amber eyes closed only briefly as she lowered the black hood from his head. Slowly she opened her eyes and looked up at him. For the first time since he had placed the blade against her throat, golden amber met dark amber as their eyes truly locked. "Akito, take me to the bed," Hope said softly. Instantly Akito picked her up and carried her to the bed, laying her down gently. He laid with her as he began to suck on her nipple. Hope took it upon herself to reach her hand down and started to stroke his length. Both moaned at the feel of exploring each other's bodies. Akito laid his body on top of Hope's as he gently ran his clawed fingers along her body, tracing every inch of her from her slender legs to her beautiful head. Akito placed himself between her slender legs and lowered his face to her womanhood and started to lick her there. Instantly she cried out in pleasure as her hips raised up to meet each lick and flick of his tongue. She could feel a tightness in her lower body from his tongue's assault on her lower region. Once Akito was sure she was nice and wet and ready to receive his length, he slowly raised his body up hers. "Are you ready, my love?" Akito asked softly as he looked into her golden amber eyes. Hope could only nod as she reveled in the feel of his body over hers. The following morning Hope awoke on the bed completely naked with a note from Akito on the pillow beside her. She had fallen asleep in his arms last night after their several rounds of lovemaking. As awareness came back to her, so did the memories of what had happened last night. The passionate kisses that had left her rose lips swollen this morning, her fingers gently touching her lips as she then saw the flashes of the contact last night. One of her hands gently traced down to her lower region as she felt the heat still from their beautiful lovemaking. She then picked up the note on the pillow beside her. "My dearest love, I really hate to leave you with just this note, but I could not stand the thought of waking you. I have to return to base, but I will always be around. I love you, Akito." After she was dressed and left the inn, it was that time of year for her to visit Zan. She headed to the meeting place and sat on the boulder that she used to talk with him. Her mind replayed what had happened the night before. They had married and mated. She could not wait to tell Zan that she was now married to the man that had stolen her heart so quickly. "Hope, you beat me here," Zan's voice said as he floated before her. Hope's smile widened at seeing her longtime friend. "Zan, how have you been?" "Well, I hope," Hope said as she offered her closest oldest friend the brightest smile he could get from her kind-hearted body. Zan smiled in return, telling the goddess was bursting with news. "Hope, what is your news?" "Something good about that shadow-born you have been seeing?" he asked with a wink, joking with her. Hope smiled even more as she looked at him. "Yes, actually I do. He proposed and we got married yesterday," Hope stated as she looked into Zan's eyes, holding her breath. Zan smiled and he was happy to hear that his dear friend had gotten married. That was why she smelled slightly different to him. Last night was their wedding night, they had consummated the marriage. He wondered if he should give her the good news that she would find out later or not. If you liked it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm not sure how often I'll upload. I will try for once a week at least. This has been part 1 of Winter in Love.